Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Elemental webinar, where we're going to be discussing smart controls and building management systems and how they can offer improved comfort for occupants at the same time as reducing operating costs and energy use. We've got a great panel here today with Dr. Salvador Acha, who is Research Fellow at Imperial College London, and we've got Graham Rees, who is President of the BCIA, and Mark Parker, MD of MetaB. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So let's just get straight into it and kick things off with some proper introductions and some scene setting around today's topic. So if we can start with Salvador, could you introduce yourself properly and give us a bit of detail about the work that you've been doing on the Sainsbury's energy efficiency and decarbonisation strategy, particularly with a view to building controls?
Sure thing. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invitation of being involved in this event. First of all, well, I'm an academic and consultant focused on facilitating the transition towards net zero with a particular expertise in the built environment. And that means that we focus quite a lot in the work that we do on how we use and consume energy and trying to inform, in this case, especially commercial and industrial consumers, how best to use their energy and to reduce their carbon footprint. I've been working at Imperial College since, doing research since 2006. My expertise is also in, systems engineering background. So that means that we do quite a lot of multidisciplinary work in terms of decarbonizing heat, electricity, transport, etc. And in particular, since 2010, I've been working with Sainsbury's in a very exciting partnership in which we are trying to support the company in their decarbonization strategy and how they can become a more sustainable business, but also that naturally that involves improving their business operations. And because they have many supermarkets, a lot of the work that we've been doing is going into their supermarkets, looking into the data, how their fridges, their heating systems are performing, and then doing quite a lot of interesting models that allow us to give them insights as to how best they can be more efficient in how they use energy. Sainsbury's has a commitment of being net zero by 2035. And the partnership that we have with them is at least going for a few more years in that effort of us trying to create this synergy between academia and industry to produce interesting findings of what we can actually implement in the real world. So having said that, I would say that in the work that we do with Sainsbury's, there's two key pillars. One is sustainability and energy strategy, which has to do a lot with the net zero strategy, basically a long-term view thinking of what is going to be the actionable plans of how they will enact a decarbonization strategy for heating, refrigerants, transport, and power. But also there's this other pillar which has to do more with the engineering and innovation of the built environment. And naturally that has to do with more concise pilots where we're taking the information, the data from their buildings and trying to develop models so that we can implement new control strategies. And that's a little bit what brings us here today. So with regards to building controls, we have done quite a lot of research in the fields of machine learning techniques and how to evaluate energy usage and benchmark performance. We've done also quite a lot of work on recommissioning HVAC systems, refrigeration systems, and lighting systems, as well as businesses incorporate new technologies into their estate, be it battery storage systems, combined heat and powered, or heat recovery systems. We take all this data that these systems are providing us to develop digital twins so that we can identify what's the best way to utilize them and how best to integrate them with the existing infrastructure. So aside from these very interesting works in the last few months, probably now years, probably since the pandemic, we really started focusing much more on the IoT aspects, Internet of Things, and trying to make the most out of this data revolution that we're going through in terms of what information new sensors can give us, what APIs can, third-party APIs can provide us, and for us to also develop our own APIs based on all the data that is abundant out there so that we can try new control strategies in their buildings. And that's, I think, trying to crack this puzzle of building controls is definitely a key pillar for net zero.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. If we can move on to Graham, if you can introduce yourself fully and also explain BCIA's role and what your thoughts are about what building controls can do when it comes to climate change and energy prices and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, good morning. Oh, and thanks again, just as Salvador said, thanks for the opportunity to come along and participate in the session. So I'm Graham Rees. I'm the current president of the BCIA, that's the Building Controls Industry Association. And we're a member organisation made up of, I think, just in excess of 140, maybe close to 150 member companies now that range from the very largest sort of international manufacturers of control equipment and software, all the way through to, maybe one or two people organizations that deploy that equipment. We call them systems integrators. They would take that equipment and set it to work. So as an association, and by the way, myself, I've been involved and employed in one way or another in building controls for in excess of 30 years now. It's quite scary when those numbers come out, that quite how long that is. So I've seen a lot of change and a lot of development in the industry over that time. But as an association, as Building Controls Industry Association, what we try to do is to promote the benefits of good control, be that with end user customers, trying to influence government and other bodies about good control and the benefits that good control can bring. Building controls, I obviously find it fascinating because I've been associated with it for so long, but it's one of those strange things that when done very well, nobody actually notices. You go into a building and it's too hot or too cold, or there's a cold draft or something like that. You notice, and you may complain, or it may be uncomfortable. When it's done very well, nobody notices. So unlike a nice piece of architecture or construction, people will stand back and admire. Nobody really takes an awful lot of notice when control's done very, very well. However, the only thing that people do notice when controls are done not so well is probably their energy bill. And that's obviously one of the significant benefits. But, you mentioned there the various crises that we have. We have an energy, we have a cost of living crisis. We have an energy crisis. We've the climate crisis. And in our industry, and I think, to be honest, in most industries as well, we also have a skills crisis where there's just not enough skilled people coming into the industry. So another action of good control, and one of the drivers that the BCI are trying hard to do, is to help the member companies, to help the users of the systems that go in, to realize the benefits of control that can help with their energy costs. It can help with the climate crisis by reducing carbon and so on, by reducing the energy costs. And what we're trying hard to do, as well as raising awareness of good control, is to try and feed the industry with a resource pool. And we've been very successful as an organization in helping to create an apprenticeship program. That's a recognized now formal qualification for building control engineers to come into the industry through that route. We have a range of other training courses that have been developed for sort of non-apprentice pathways into the industry as well. So we're doing an awful lot around education to feed talent into this exciting industry. I think you listen to some of the things that Salvador's talked about there with his research. It is a very exciting and developing and growing industry to get into. So we're trying our hardest to feed that as well. So lots there to take in, but a good deal of work being undertaken by the industry association, which is great to be involved with.
Brilliant, thank you. You mentioned obviously there the huge changes that have happened and some of the kind of exciting stuff that's going on at the moment, which leads us nicely on to Mark. Could you tell us, Mark, who you are, where you sit within this space, and something maybe about the sort of emerging technologies that your clients might be using?
Sure. And again, I just want to echo Salvador and Graham's point. Thank you, Lucy, Elemental team, for having me on the panel and sharing this with Graham and Salvador as well. I'm Mark Parker, I'm Managing Director of MetaB. We are a digital FM company. When I always say that, people go, what does that mean, Mark? What is a digital FM? 5 years ago, when we set the company up, we were going to focus just purely on the software and hardware side. So designing, implementing various energy management softwares, IoT sensors, etc. But to pick up on Graham's point around the skills side of it, we decided to have electrical infrastructure in our core as well. Now, what that means is not only can we design and recommend various pieces of technology to go onto your site, we also have the skilled engineers to implement that, because we quickly found from the start, it is absolutely fantastic and quite easy to sit with a client and talk to them around the art of the possible from a technology point of view and an implementation side of it. But when it comes to actual operational implementation, it's very different. And we have also found that where you have potentially very good control technology on a site, it is not optimized for the usage of the building. And that comes down to, again, the point that Graham made around the skills, the understanding of how these pieces of equipment work on site. For us, in regards to emerging technology, it sounds quite boring, but for us, it gets us very exciting. It is all about energy at the moment. No wonder why that is. But for us, we call this, we have nice taglines we like to use here. So we call this silent evidence. And what we mean by that is your business is consistently trying to show you how efficient or inefficient it is. And all we've been doing for the past 12 to 18 months now, which has been quite a big focus for us, has been bringing that data to life for our clients to show them plant level, asset level, how inefficient or inefficient that piece of asset is performing, and then talking around how we make changes, be that via the control mechanisms that they already have on site or various other pieces of technology that we can implement. And business is booming at the moment because people are naturally quite concerned, not only with the cost of energy now, but we have seen some quite scary forecasts from some of our clients around energy prices 24-25, year 24-25. Some of these are increasing by up to 80%, which is absolutely shocking considering what bills are at the moment. So for us, it's all about not panicking at the moment. There is a crisis, but everything is a crisis. But there is an issue to be dealt with at the moment, but taking the time to understand where to focus and point this technology to not only protect yourself now, but try to mitigate some of the potential issues that are coming down the track over the next 2 to 3 years.
Do you work on with all different types of buildings then, Mark, or is it a particular sector that you focus on?
We're broad sector. So at the moment, we're putting in a load of EMS and live people occupancy tracking systems into government buildings at the moment, 25 of those currently as we speak, and also large retail manufacturing. Naturally, when you look at large retail and manufacturing, they're big, heavy users, and they are penalised quite heavily, both in terms of carbon taxes and more so importantly from their employees wanting to see that the company is taking this seriously and investing in these areas. But for us, as long as you have an energy signature that meets a specific threshold for us to be able to deal with, then we can work with you. It doesn't have to be the big PLCs, it can be SME down.
Okay, thank you. The next thing that I was hoping we could talk about is essentially how smart is smart. How much can building controls do, or building management systems? I mean, maybe this is just me being very naive, but I think there is this sort of assumption that you just get some really great tech and it solves all your problems. I'm guessing it's not that straightforward. So I'd sort of like to start with Graham, if I can here. So your members are constantly innovating, coming up with new stuff, new tools that can control our buildings. But how far can they go? What can they do for the building managers and the building owners?
Yeah, sure. I think if I may start, I think I would do the members a disservice. And probably Mark and Salvador, I'm sure, would agree with this, because a lot of the things we will talk about will be the super exciting, shiny, cutting edge technology that is there and is super exciting. But I think I should serve the members correctly and start with get the basics right, which isn't particularly super technically biased. And where we will, I'm sure, go with this conversation about data and Internet of Things we've already hinted at. It's fair to say, I think, Salvador's research would be useless if all of the data that was collected was incorrect. So if there were temperature sensors, let's say, that were not positioned correctly, or not in the airflows, or in a space that was sited under a photocopier, let's say, it wouldn't be right. If Mark's offerings were based on the assumptions that control valves were open and they weren't because the actuators were broken, or a valve was letting by and some other system was overcompensating and so on, there's a lot that could go wrong. So the basics have to be right. It's that age-old, sort of computer thing that we used to talk about, rubbish in, rubbish out. The basics have to be correct. And I think that's where good control starts. The systems need to be designed as such. Mechanical plant needs to be sized correctly for the application. And what we often see, what members often see, and sometimes they're sort of light-hearted. I see light-hearted posts on Facebook groups where, it's a controls problem, and you find a completely broken down piece of equipment in a photograph or something rather. And these things, unfortunately, are fairly common. But what we often see is a performance gap, as we call it. That a building will be designed for a particular purpose. Systems installed, commissioned, set to work, and will be handed over to that end client as designed. But often over time, the use of the space, the use of the building changes. This happened obviously a lot through the COVID period, where occupancy changed and so on and so forth. And again, newer technologies, as Mark mentioned about occupancies and so on, is key to good control. But those changes need to be taken on board, and systems adapted and fine-tuned. So point made about let's get the basics right, because if we're not getting, if we've not got things under control, if we're not reading the right readings and confident that the commands are commanding correctly, then we're wasting our time, basically. Once we're confident that all of that is correct, then yes, the technology basically knows no end. But where I think we're going with that technology on that firm footing is a really exciting place, because then everything becomes digital. An awful lot can be done remotely, whereas years ago it used to be, people on site to take care of things, to investigate things. But so much can be done now digitally, so much can be done remotely, and we're into the realms now, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go on, of predictive and forecasted conditions. We had wonderful technology 30 odd years ago that would look at outside air temperature and compensate for cold days and hot days and so on. That was marvelous. And I remember having discussions all those years ago with school caretakers about such things, and how they no longer had to get up to turn things on at 4 a.m. on a cold winter's morning. That was all automated and taken care of for them. But now the technology's there that we can adjust things remotely, securely, based on weather forecasting, around occupancy forecasting. We can change light levels. It really knows no bounds. But but I'll make my point one more time. It has to be based on a firm footing. That the basics have to be right. Otherwise, everything thereafter is a waste of time.
And by the basics, do you mean sort of the initial sort of installation of technology? Everything's got to be done 100% correctly. What exactly do you mean by the basics? If you don't mind me asking.
Absolutely right from the start. Yes, and that's fairly simple things. That's the right temperature point or status point is reflected in the system, and if we're opening or closing something, or we're turning something on and off, the relevant piece of equipment is turning on and off, or modulating, and so on. That also extends to the design of the equipment, that fans, pumps, pipes, ductworks, and so on are sized correctly and are appropriately designed for the application of the building. By and large, that ordinarily is correct, and systems go in as designed, but it's thereafter the ongoing service and maintenance of those equipments, and adjusting the systems to suit the current application of the space. So often general office space, for example, may be designed for, I don't know, the accountancy team. There'd be a re-layout of the office, and there'd be a research and development team. So suddenly there's lots of different equipment in the space. The heat loads are different. The whole application of the space has changed. Yet the systems that serve, the air, the heating, the ventilation, and so on, don't often change. And then people get too hot, or they get too cold, or systems are running inefficiently because actually the use of the space has changed. So that can all be taken care of if the systems are maintained, adapted, refined, tuned, etc., to suit. But back to one of the first points I made, often controls are this invisible thing that, when done well, nobody takes any notice of. And sadly, that's often the case. People will relay space and not give fair appreciation to the control. So many times I've seen office premises where new partition walls have been put in. What was once an open office space becomes multiple smaller offices, and the mechanical equipment is not serving those rooms correctly. It's just overlooked, which is a mistake. And then of course you go into some of the more advanced controls that are available in those systems, and then we're into this space of, someone in an office somewhere is too hot. Why is that? And we can run all the kind of analytics and algorithms that we wish, but if there's no fresh air getting into that space, there's not a lot we can do. So hence I come back to, get the basics correct as well. And it's as we've advanced, the scope of controls has got much, much broader. So where we were once thinking, heating, ventilation, cooling, now the scope is vast. It's like Mark was saying, it's occupancy, it's lighting levels, lighting controls, it's room booking. It's just a vast array of systems that can be brought together.
So moving on to you next then, Mark. So Graham was talking then about people sort of only really noticing controls when they go wrong. So let's give them a chance to shine now. Can you sort of talk about the sort of digitalization of buildings for your clients and what that allows them to achieve? Like, what are the advantages that they get that they might not notice unless they went wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. To echo Graham's point, I couldn't agree more with the basics side of this. We call this brilliant basics within Metabee. When we first engage with a new client, we spend quite a lot of time at the start just reviewing that part. Is everything set up as correctly as it should be? Has there been any building drift? Have we seen floors that were previously open plan have partition walls put in? Has the plan been changed, or where it can be changed, or any elements of control being put in place to be able to take into account of that. Recently came to an office not too long ago where the office was built in the 60s, a huge building, probably the size of a football pitch, if not bigger. But this was built at a time when it was a little bit like Mad Men, if you've ever seen that show, where everybody's got their own little individual offices. So they had air handling units on the route to replicate that. There was 42 of these. And when they decided to change the floor plan, they didn't decide to think about what to do with the plan. And as a result, if you're not careful, you can pressurize that building because you have 42 handling units on the roof just to play with. So we've seen all sorts. But from a digitalization point of view, for us, it's just starting to bring invisible data to life. Yes, the control side of it is extremely important. And if anything, without having a very good and robust control plan in place, you're almost negating the point of being able to digitalize anything because you're just throwing good money after bad. But for us, it's very much to do with how the building operates in relation to the people that are in that building. That's where we're seeing our clients ask more and more questions. And yes, I think COVID has played a big part in that, more so around people now working remotely. There's been a lot of debate on social media and in the news around people returning to work. Are people going to return to work full time? Are people going to be doing part time? Is it going to be a 4-day week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But you do have corporations that are sat with a lease or the landlord with a very expensive building, and they don't know what they used to know prior to the pandemic, how accurately that building is going to be occupied from a Monday to a Friday. So what we're now starting to do is understand not so much the plant is important in the site, it's more the soft and squishy humans that are coming into the building. How do they operate? What do they do? Where do they go? Where do they dwell? What assets do they use when they're on site? How long do they spend in the canteen? When does the canteen kitchen plant start to kick up in relation to historic data of how people start to go to the canteen, et cetera, et cetera? So the list goes on, but we're starting to see some very strong recommendations of being able to manipulate the control side of the plant in relation to how the people move around the building. And it sounds quite futuristic, but it's not that difficult to do. As long as you can understand how and track people across the space, not in an intrusive way. Obviously, there are some difficulties depending on how this is positioned, which is why communication is absolutely critical with your staff when you're starting to put in people tracking technology, because that can go very wrong very quickly if it's not handled correctly. As long as they're engaged and they understand the value of this and what value it is bringing to not only them, but to the company, then for us, that is a great way to start to advise your control policy, because you're actually using how people come into your space and how they operate in that space to not only save energy, you can then maybe start to think of, I've got 8 floors in this building. I might not need 6 of them. I could move people to the rest. I could close part of the floor off on a Monday and Friday. We're starting to see these conversations now with our clients. And from a P&L impact point of view, it is massive, absolutely huge. And in relation to the investment into the technology, the ROIs can get very silly, anywhere within 12 to 6 months, some of these ROIs. But it's not a hard decision to make. But for us, it's very much focusing on the plant side, getting the basics right. Those brilliant basics have to be key. And when we engage those clients, I would say a very small percentage at the top have got those brilliant basics in place and then can start to look at some of the more futuristic stuff around AR, VR, being able to bring the plant to life as you're walking around, how your security move around the buildings, etc., in terms of what data that building's giving them back through their various headsets. But very tiny percentage at the top we see that. The vast majority are, help me with my basics, let's get that correct, and then start to help me understand if my control strategy is in line with how people move and operate around my building.
Thanks, Mark. Elliot's just made a good comment in the chat there. A great reminder that the goal is to serve people, not buildings, which is very true. Moving on to Salvador. So you've been working with Sainsbury's for 12 years, is that right now?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
So you must have seen a lot of changes in sort of controls technology in that time. Can you sort of tell us about the biggest changes that we've seen, and maybe touch on, you did mention it briefly earlier, the role that IoT sort of is increasingly playing now?
Sure. So I would say that in terms of changes, over based on the years I've been working in this area, is that I can say that the value or the priority that, in this case, companies, it's not only Sainsbury's, I would say this is representative of the industry, the value they're placing on exploiting the value of their data has shifted dramatically in the last few years. So when I started collaborating with them, they didn't put a lot of high importance on storing information or improving sensing capabilities of what was going on in their buildings. But I think that also had to do with the perceived level of risk in doing things differently. And they also didn't want to touch things. They were a little bit like, scared of trying things differently or getting approval from senior management. But I think also you could add to that this had to do with the fact of the lack of know-how on how their BMS really worked, because usually they outsource this work to third parties, and these systems are usually proprietary, and they also have some sort of limited computational power, and sometimes the ideas that they had couldn't be realized. So there was it was a bit stagnant. You could say that trialing new things was hard and difficult and time consuming, and sometimes people can't be bothered with it. But I think due to this slow pace of what has been going on in the building industry, I think it's coming to an end, because I think we are living the data revolution. Sourcing data, for example, on energy prices or weather is becoming very commonplace. You have some very interesting APIs out there being made available, or one can develop APIs if you have the time and the resources and the brain power. You can start developing some very interesting APIs, and furthermore, you can link them to cloud-based solutions and these Internet of Things concepts, and you get a good combination of how you can be smarter in how you manage your equipment, your air handling units, your heating systems, etc., to reduce costs. And naturally, the more familiar you get with these topics, the less risk adverse you become, and you start implementing new control strategies. So as my colleagues mentioned, well, combining all these factors, we have started looking into model predictive control frameworks. And now we're starting to develop different pilots in the UK for different Sainsbury's supermarket buildings. And here we're utilizing cloud-based services. And we think that this approach can be, for these types of consumers, which they have their own, BMS systems, their local control systems in their buildings. You can link them to cloud-based services and through remote gateways, and you can enable some supervisory control and send them, set point adjustment changes at different times of day, depending on what the algorithms tell you that how you should be, influencing building performance. So this is a little bit what the future looks like for us. And right now we're conducting some interesting pilots. We've done some publications that I'm happy to share with you if you're interested in this after the meeting.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you. So Salvador obviously spoke then about the massive amount of data. Well, you've all mentioned it, that's being produced by all these building management systems. So Mark, could you talk to us about data a little bit, please, and explain sort of what metrics are being collected by building controls and how they're being used, and also if any kind of human intervention is needed, or do they just sort of collect all this data, tick along, do their thing, and we can just sit back and relax and not worry?
Wouldn't that be great? I think if we could work in a place where myself as an employee, the building control side of it is connected to my diary, and everybody else's diary works in that place, and it knows how many people are going to come in that day, what seat I'm going to go to, what meetings I've got that day, what I usually like to eat, etc., and get that building ready for that day in relation to the person coming in. Is that available? I'm sure it is. Have I seen that to that level? No. Being honest, I haven't. I think unless your second name is Musk and you've got budgets the size of someone like that, we're not going to see that anytime soon. But from a data point of view, we need to be careful here, because we need to make sure we don't drown in data. Anybody can put sensors in, anybody can produce data. I can timestamp that, I can tell you what the temperature was at a certain point of day, etc., etc. But to what end is that important? It needs to have a user case or a story behind that data. And then ultimately, what are we going to do with that data? So the data that we collect at the moment is various and wide. Everything from live second by second kilowatt hour current amp voltage data on assets on site, and that's everything from air handling units, chillers, AC, rising buzz bars, and then onto the floors, etc., for the dBs and the lighting and the power. Then overlaying that with, again, people data. The people data, I speak about that quite a bit. That is really starting to become forefront of people's thinking, and that is not only how many people are in the building, but where they are in the building, what they do in the building, as I previously mentioned. But for us, this is where we have to work very smartly with bringing that data to life. Now, some of our clients love, and they absolutely love, CSV files. So raw data. Give me as much raw data as you can, Mark. I want second by second data, 24 hours previously, showing me all these different matrix. And they've got armies and armies of analysts that they're going to do and pull various different other data sets across their estate that I don't have access to or need access to model that out as they see fit. Great. Very easy. No problem to do that. However, the very bulk of our clients want to be able to not only understand the data, but use the data to engage their wider FM teams. So if you're working with a particular client, they might have an FM company that look after them. You might not be going through the FM to talk to that client. You might be direct, and the FM company are the ones that normally look after the controls and the actual plant of the building. How do we engage the FMs? Because the FMs know exactly how that building operates. You'd like to think they would know exactly how that building operates. They have got the mechanical and electrical skill sets to be able to understand what's happening, but they might not be able to know or be able to see how that asset is performing live or what data it's producing, to that silent evidence point that I made. So we then take the time to build very engaging, colourful, live IoT dashboards. Quite simple to do. So you pull in different various elements of data and you bring it to life in a way that the client wants, tailored to their brand, tailored to what message they want to be able to push that week, that month, that year. The data changes constantly. The amount of times I've been sat in meetings and we've had occupancy sensors and live energy tracking, and the client will come in, we will have the dashboard on, they will see that meeting room say that there's 4 people in there, instantly change to 5 people, and this is a CO2 level now as a result in that room. And also you've got someone using the zip tap outside to be able to fill their drink with a hot coffee or whatever it might be. Then you can see the actual amp of that zipper tap go zip and jump up straight away. When you bring that data to life, people get excited, and I mean they genuinely get excited, and people that are not necessarily data people, because it then explodes into, right, okay, what can we do? What can we do? And unfortunately, if you've got the poor FM sat in there, they're sat there going, oh, God, I can feel there's a lot more work coming my way. But when it's engaged in the correct way, the FMs really start to get on board with it, because they understand it is such a value add to their client. And being honest, it makes the FM very sticky then, because my experience would be only a very small percentage of the FMs do this well. And the ones that do it well are the ones that are absolutely not going anywhere with their clients. So for us, getting the data is great. It has to have a story behind that data. You have to have a reason why you're pulling that data, and also you have to have a reason why you're presenting that data. But don't make it boring. Make it engaging. Engage it on different levels. You will have the Salvadors of this world who will no doubt love a whole raft of data, as raw as you can get it, so they can run models. But then you also have people like me who just want to be able to see a nice, colourful picture, and I understand that everything's okay. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to blend and change depending on who you talk to. But yes, story behind the data. Where is it going? What is it doing? Why am I seeing it?
So obviously, Marcus referred to your work there, Salvador. So now, can you just explain this to me? Because I have to say I'm not familiar with it. So what exactly is cloud-based model predictive control, and what how does that use data to better use building controls?
That question's
Yes,
for
please.
me, right? Yeah, sure. So model predictive control is a technique, an optimization technique, where you are optimizing the performance of decision variables. Could be, let's say, for instance, a heating valve in an air handling unit, and you optimize. Let's take, for example, this heating valve over a time horizon, or that you can define it, for instance, in over the next 24 hours. So taking into account the energy requirements of the building, you can develop this. You can simulate the thermal properties of the building, the heating system, taking into account the weather predictions of what's going to be the outside temperature that day, what's going to be the energy prices of that day, and based on the set of criteria of the set point temperatures that you need to hit in the building and how quickly you can heat the space, you can start developing these mathematical models so that it'll tell you when should the heating valve be open, and by how much heat thermal power you should be providing to the space. And naturally, these models can be as complex or as simple. You can develop linear models or non-linear models for these predictive controls. But basically, it tries to give you some insights as to how you should be managing your assets in order to deliver a minimum level of performance while ensuring that you're saving energy consumption versus a business as usual approach or a standard control approach.
And presumably these are kind of flexible then, so they can adapt when the data that's being put in changes. So I don't know if there was like a freak weather condition or something, they could adapt.
Of course, and also to add on to your question on the cloud-based solutions is that right now we for instance we use Amazon Web Services in the but basically it's a way for us to gather all the data, process it, and spew out a command or a set of commands that then are transmitted to the local controllers of the building, so that you don't overwhelm the computing processes going on in the local control system. Basically, you just send a simplified command, which is raise the set point temperature or turn off the heating system, so that the local PLC can just enact that action. So that's why we let the cloud-based solution and the service do the hard work, really, and it comes at a very low cost for implementation, actually, and it also helps in terms of replication and replicability, because once you set up a working framework, then you can start replicating it for different types of buildings as well.
And Graham, from your perspective, the question of data, obviously, so you said you've got, is it nearly 150 members?
Nearly 150.
So that's a lot of companies creating lots of these tools that collect data. So is data something that they would use when they're kind of honing new solutions and developing sort of innovative new products and services?
Yeah, so I think it's a constant source of learning. So it's interesting listening to Salvador. It's no surprise really that the sort of retailers lead the pack in this, because retail science is all based on data. We're talking here about maybe commercial office type buildings where we're now looking at footfall, where people go. Mark mentioned where people dwell, how long they're in particular areas, and so on. The retailers have done this for years. So it's no surprise really they lead the pack. But yes, the members of the BCIA, they serve these buildings. They serve, pretty much every type of commercial space in there, and use historic data, their experiences, to continually learn and develop and what they deploy. I mean, Mark made some really interesting points, and I'm reminded of a study. I wish my memory worked well enough to remember the providers of the study. It's maybe a little outdated now, but it suggested for every pound that was spent on energy in a building, £10 would be spent on the equipment over the life cycle of that building, but £100 is spent on the staffing and the operations and the productivity of that business. So, one of the comments was about serving the people, not the building. For me, the data, using the data to raise awareness of some of these points, because if you have somebody working in office or studying in a university, or frankly just trying to get well in a hospital, the environment that the controls provide will make that person better a little quicker. You study a lot easier, and the human brain will absorb more in a positive and comfortable environment, and workers are more productive in that way. So the awareness that maybe scrimp or pinch and save here costs a massive amount, tenfold the amount in productivity and so on. So back to the question, yes, our members will deliver all of these things, and I think one of the goals or the ambitions is to raise that awareness within communities beyond the traditional space. Mark again talked about the FM providers and the mechanical contractors and the different users. That there has to be a value proposition for all of these sort of players in this space that we're in, such that data does deliver genuine value, or we'll just end up with this massive great pool of data that people occasionally look at a chart and just ignore. But once the realization is there that there is value in that, and acting upon it brings benefit, that's I think where we all start to win. And of course, selfishly from a BCIA perspective, all of the member companies win, because they start to really see, or their clients really start to see the true value in what's being provided there. And it's not just this fit and forget. Everyone in that chain starts to see value, and the members will too as well.
Just keeping an eye on the time, I just going to ask one more question to all of you before we just go to some audience questions. Graham, if we can stay with you first, and if you could just give us your predictions for the future, really. So what do you think, I mean, we've touched on a lot of it already, but what do you think the big sort of building control trends are going to be? Presumably more connectivity and that kind of thing, but anything else you wanted to flag up?
Yeah, I mean, I got three sort of points very quickly. One, please don't forget the basics. We've talked about it, and I keep hammering that one home, because without that, we're all wasting our time. I think again, that sort of 110, 100, raising awareness of such things, and some of the things that Mark and Salvador have talked about as well, the broader benefit of good controls beyond this, our traditional audiences of mechanical contractors and facilities managers. There is benefit in good control, and obviously analytics and reports and presentation of data that comes from control systems to an audience beyond, HR people, property managers. Just as Mark said, what are we doing in these spaces? Are they being used efficiently? Are our staff as productive as they could be, or can we make changes? And data will feed that comes from the system. So I think awareness of the benefits of that is growing, and we really need to push and drive that. And I think a little closer to home in our control space is data will be, or is king, really. Where we were once many years ago looking at systems, maybe doing an annual check once a year. Does this work? Does that work? Is this reading correct? Is that reading correct? Systems now, with the analytical tools, with remote connectivity and so on, can do those checks, thousands of times in an hour. Whereas it was once a year manual person turns up with a tool bag. What that drives is far more efficient operations, and it gives us this advantage of being able to predict and forecast what's going to happen. So instead of something breaking down when it's worn out, maybe 6 months after I last looked at it, we can monitor and analyze what's happening and we were able to forecast, some service exchanges perhaps, maybe at the 11th hour. So we get absolute value from a particular asset, but we get in and we repair or we replace or we update before it breaks down, before there's disruption, before there's annoyance to the users, before they start getting too hot, too cold, etc. Everything can be done with minimal disruption in a far, far more efficient way. That's where I think the future. Well, the technology's already here, but I think it's an awareness and an education and a sort of raising awareness of the benefits of controls to this much broader audience. I think is where we need to go.
And would you agree with that, Salvador, if you're talking about what the future holds? I don't know if you can hear me or not. Is he frozen?
Apologies, I was on mute.
Oh, that's okay then.
So I broadly agree in the sense that we need to communicate effectively the benefits of implementing smarter building controls, especially to senior management who they don't have the engineering expertise, or they speak another language. So it is very important and paramount to get them to understand the benefits of having the capabilities to enact smarter controls, because now the technology is here, and if you really want to make the most out of data, you need to invest and you need to upgrade your systems. And I think building operators need to try to pursue to enhance their procurement process whenever they're evaluating either procuring a new BMS system or upgrading an existing system, so that those devices have standards that are computationally efficient, they're accessible, they're flexible, they're easy to update. They try to champion open protocol communications and try to make the most out of the hardware and software capabilities that are out there in terms of devices and sensing capabilities. But also, let's not forget that people or building service engineers that will program these devices is also a very valuable resource. So you need to partner with organizations that are capable in delivering these benefits that these technologies can offer. And I think it's important for customers for sure wish that vendors offer flexibility in how data is managed and presented, either in reports or graphical user interfaces. I think it's important also to try to understand how the consumer or the end user wants to see the data, and for that to be presented in different ways, so that it's not the FM people or the energy managers are not going to be the only audience of this information. You need to be able to convey it in different formats as well. So I think that's very important to highlight, and also to, as my colleague was mentioning, is to periodically update or verify that these systems are working properly, because also technology is evolving quite quickly, etc. So you need to keep your eye on the ball, because even though a system is properly procured and commissioned, after 6 or 12 months, it needs to be revised. Maybe something goes wrong and you start losing the benefits.
Thank you. Can we get a final thought from you, Mark, before we just squeeze in a couple of audience questions?
Sure. Absolutely. I'll speak pie in the sky. How am I doing that? And obviously with the title being "The Future's Smart." I don't know when this future is, but it will be upon us hopefully soon. But we have quite a big, I would say, challenge, an opportunity coming down the pipe at an alarming rate, and that is artificial intelligence. So there are billions and billions and billions of dollars being spent by DeepMind, by Google, by Meta, by Metaverse, pouring tons of cash into this technology. Now, what does that mean for us? I think we could see a future where buildings are almost seen as alive. And I mean buildings that even could be seen as sentient, when we talk about AI. And when it look at that from a buildings control point of view, you will have buildings that will know exactly how it should operate based on the local traffic conditions, based on the weather, based on how people move around it, based on how the plant should operate on those parameters. The plant will be able to check itself, as Graham said, millions of times a second to understand if it should be operating in a specific way. In regards to the energy savings that will do in the asset life, it will be phenomenal. But also, if the asset is going to break, if a pipe is potentially going to leak, if it's eroding away, that asset will be able to not only alert the various contractor to come and fix it, because we don't live in a time yet where we've got sidewalks to do that, but that engineer will also be racing, so to speak, with the materials sent from the supplier to be able to catch the engineer on site. RAMs will be automatically sent. Facial recognition will let the guys and girls on to be able to do the work. But at the same time, the asset will then talk to the other buildings in the area to let them know that it's got that problem and to check itself. And the asset will constantly learn as it evolves to be able to understand how it not only protects itself, but also make sure it's operating in the best way it can do. Now, then when you start to look at that from a meeting room optimization point of view, how then people interact both virtually, and I mean virtually like we are now, or virtually as in you'll be in a room and people will be there via various different projection technologies, or also physically as well. That building will almost seem alive. If you've ever seen iRobot, where Will Smith's walking around and he's talking to the AI around the building, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But in the future, that is a very, very, very real possibility. And I think for me, that's very exciting. I hope I'm alive enough to be able to see that.
Thank you for that image. A couple of questions, if we can just squeeze them in quickly. So, Mark, this is possibly one for you as well, about the issue of security. So what consideration should be given to cybersecurity, particularly for BMS controlling critical or sensitive equipment?
Important. Yeah, extremely important. And unfortunately, something that could be forgotten. It's great to be able to understand that you've got a solution, but once you start to go through that procurement process and you bring CIOs involved, or depending on if you're dealing with government as well, the cybersecurity departments, if you don't have the correct procedures in place, it will bog down and likely won't happen. And when I say correct procedures in place, you will normally already have them. If you're a big company, enterprise architecture systems, they already have a lot of these in place. Sometimes they just don't know that they have them, but they do. Cyber Essentials is a key one. Cyber Essentials Plus, doing your penetration testing. We found as well that being able to host our technology on the likes of an AWS, as Salvador mentioned, really helps from a security point of view. Obviously, Amazon's got a lot more cash than anyone. So in regards to how those servers move about, as long as we found they're over in the States side of the world and not on the other side, most CIOs are happy with that. But also think about how you're going to network it. So for us, we try to, where possible, avoid going on the client's network. But no real reason why we can't do that. We just try to avoid it because it speeds up the process of getting the technology in. You can create your own secure network that doesn't touch the client's network at all, and is extremely encrypted and locked down. So you're going to struggle to be able to get into that. But again, nothing is unhackable. If they can get into the CIA and all sorts of different things, everything is possibly hackable. But you need to protect yourself as much as you can, as well as your client. So for us, AWS, Cyber Essentials Plus, penetration testing, all the brilliant basics you would expect, but also think especially how you're going to network it. Have those conversations with your client early, straight away, because that can really slow down the process. So make sure when you're starting to have these conversations of controlling and what technology you're going to put on site, how are we going to network this? How are we going to make sure we tick your boxes and our boxes from a security point of view? And then when it comes to actual implementation, it should be quite a straight thing to do.
Brilliant, thank you. One quick question just before we end, and I think this is probably best for Graham. Andy wants to know if there are controls that can increase the use of renewable electricity for heat, e.g. by preheating with heat pumps and wind or solar energy. Is that something that you're seeing your members working on?
Indeed, more so. Obviously, one would need those pieces of equipment there to be controlled, but that is absolutely something that's being investigated and deployed actually. Add to that electric vehicle charging, all the various sort of energy sources, and the management of those to be the most efficient at particular moments in time to serve the building. Absolutely something that is in that whole mix of building controls.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We've gone 2 minutes over, so sorry about that. Thank you very much for your time. The session will be available to watch back on demand pretty much immediately after. But yeah, so thank you to Mark, Graham and Salvador, and thanks to everyone for joining, and we will see you next time.